How do you win award-winning wines as brothers? That's something we're going to explore on this 120th episode of the Jewish Drinking Show, bringing L'chaim to life. Welcome, everybody. I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan, and I'm very excited to welcome first-time guests to the show, Shimon and Gabriel Weiss. Weiss brothers, welcome.
Hello.
Hello, Weiss brothers Weiss. So they are, for those maybe not familiar with these brothers Weiss or Weiss brothers, they created Shirah Wines, an award-winning, probably many times over award-winning vintner brothers who their claim to fame, at least in my head, is that they were born in the great state of Ohio in the Queen City of the West, Cincinnati, which is very exciting. Yep, exactly. Go Bengals. As a fellow Ohioan, it's very exciting for me. But they currently live in the largest state in the country. 1 out of every 8 Americans lives there, California. So, guys, what can you tell us about your own biographies? After you were born in Cincinnati, how did you guys decide to start up an award-winning Shirah Wines?
From Cincinnati, we moved to Brooklyn, to Flatbush. And then eventually we moved to Lakewood. And it was when I turned 21 and could start buying alcohol that I would buy wine for Shabbos. I got really into wine. Spent a lot of money on expensive bottles. And it was just something that really interested me. I never really thought of it as a career, but I ended up in yeshiva in Or Sameach in Muncie. And a good friend of mine, his brother was working at Herzog at the time. His name was Michael Haydu. His brother Jonathan Haydu was working at Herzog. And I was like, oh, cool. You can work in the wine industry. Not just drink wine, you can make wine too. So, he was in Michael's dorm room. We'd have his home brew. He would brew his own beer. Still does. And that just somehow, like a little light bulb in my brain. Oh, make wine. So I reached out to Jonathan Haydu, and the Herzogs at the time were moving to Oxnard, and some jobs to fill, so some positions to fill. So I got hired, moved out to California. That was in 2004.
And that's for Herzog. That's for Herzog?
For Herzog Wine Cellars. And I actually started in Santa Maria with them for probably about a month, maybe a little more than a month, as they were moving all of their stuff down to Oxnard. And then, Jonathan Hayden and I, we had an apartment, and, we were driving every day. And that was it. Jonathan and I, we made some wine on the side in 2005. And I kind of just, we kind of tried to keep that going. So in 2006, we didn't make any wine. Jonathan left Herzog and went to Israel. 2007, Jonathan came back and made some of his own wine on the side, which we kind of helped with in Santa Barbara. And then that year, Shimon actually came out to California himself. In 2008, Shimon had a job working for like a fancy, artisan furniture company. But then they ended up going out of business or something. So Shimon ended up needing a job, and it was right around August of 2008. And he ended up working the harvest with us at Herzog. And so I was with Shimon and our friend Jack Levin, who now lives, he's from Philadelphia, and he's back in Philadelphia and has a wine shop over there. The three of us, we had an apartment, and we were making some of our own wine on the side. We made 4 barrels of wine, some Syrah, some Grenache. And it was then that Shimon and I were like, hey, let's do this commercially. And we decided we were going to start Shirah. So 2009 harvest was when we went commercial.
Wow. And Shimon, how did you decide? You moved out to California independent of winemaking dreams. Is that correct?
Correct. Well, my brother Gabe was already living here. And my sister also was living in LA. So I had some family. I had some, I had a little bit of a support system. So I moved out to California
and I was actually working in, like Gabe said, I was working for for a furniture company.
Mm-hmm.
But and also I was my prior to moving out to California, I worked in construction. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really what I was looking to do. I just wanted a change of scenery, but I was looking to stay as a carpenter.
Hmm.
But it was '08 where there was like that was the downturn of the housing market. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was working, but very periodically. I wasn't really working that much, just a couple weeks a month,
Mm-hmm.
doing odd jobs here and there. And yeah, man, Harvest came around, and the Herzogs, they knew me from just hanging around. And
Yeah.
they wanted to work, and yeah, that's when I started working, and then we did that little bit of wine, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's when we decided to. I just kind of ended up getting to it circumstantially, but pretty quickly got bit by the wine bug, and yeah, here we are, more than 10 years later.
That's great. So, how did you come up with the name? Or did you decide to first go do this commercially, and then how did the name pop in?
The name actually comes from the wine that I made with Jonathan Hayden in 2005. It
Mm-hmm.
was raw. And there was just someone in the Jewish community in Los Angeles. I brought a bottle to him and was like, "Yeah, what's a good name for this?" Syrah. So he's like, "Call it Shirah."
Oh.
And so it was just someone's recommendation, and
Mm-hmm.
we designed with my sister, who helps us design our labels. She does package design for the food industry, so she does a lot of really package design work.
Perfect. Yeah.
So she came up with the design of how the label should look.
Mm-hmm.
You're off from then. So
Mm-hmm.
when we started our own brand, we are like, yeah, I guess we'll just keep the names on.
That's great. And
that's our main variety is Syrah. So that's kind of our biggest focus.
oh yeah. I mean, it's interesting when I think about naming and labels and sort of the visuals. It is certainly in when just a consumer is looking in the kosher wine area, it is a striking both name wise and visually because of whether it's the Bordeaux, the power to the people. I mean, it's just some of them are just very striking, very atypical. I would say. I mean, I'm not crazy in saying this, right? It is atypical labeling and design for kosher wines.
They're not like predictable, elegant, classy looking labels. They're in your face. Yeah.
More bold, right?
Yeah,
Is that more bold, right? I mean, even maybe less bold, but certainly playful. It's even just the Brogia, for instance, obviously French too. So two brothers like you guys. It's a naming convention that I think people might typically more expect from beer, and yet it's on a wine. I think that's a little bit striking right?
Yeah, I mean these names have been established for a while, so that element of creativity is maybe a little bit less than it was in the early days for us. But
now it's old. It's an established name, right?
Yeah. But that's classic rock at this point.
There we go. Exactly. Yeah.
I guess we just like to have fun with it, and I guess that's somehow a crossover from the years, just our general attitude and approach to it.
I think a strong influence of ours was just the boutique wine scene in California on the Central Coast is very, non-traditional, a lot of cool, edgy names. So, it's not something that's atypical for the non-kosher wine scene. When you get really small wineries, there's some cool, funky, cool names.
Oh, interesting.
And labels. So I think that's probably also an influence of ours where, we're just trying to trying to walk that walk.
Interesting. When you say Central Coast, is that different than other growing regions in California, like Napa, elsewhere? Are they different than, I'm saying in a general sense, than the Central Coast culturally?
Well, culturally, I mean, Napa and Sonoma I think they're a little bit more established, and they're have a longer history. That's where you get like some of the really big fancy estates, and in Napa, and then Sonoma, you have a lot of people that are focused on Burgundian varieties, and I guess there's a certain classiness up there to some degree
that you don't have.
The Central Coast.
Okay.
Central Coast, I don't know. It's honestly really not that much different, but somehow I think that there's a little bit more of like ranch land, cowboy. Yeah, it's a little bit more of like
farmer culture on the Central Coast.
It's just a slightly different vibe down in the Central Coast.
That's fair. It's really interesting. Are there also, you started to mention varietals in the Napa area. Are there certain ones that do particularly well in the Central Coast and or that you focus on? I mean, you mentioned Syrah earlier, but are there particular varietals that you focus on?
Well, the truth is that the Central Coast is vast and it covers many microclimates. You go to Paso Robles and it's very hot, but there's a lot of cool weather that comes in during the evenings. And then you have places like Santa Rita Hills or the Santa Maria Valley and Edna Valley. These are very coastal, very much, Pinot Noir thrives there, but you would never want to grow Cabernet Sauvignon out in the Santa Rita Hills, which needs a warmer climate. But you could, Paso's famous for the Cabernet Sauvignon, and Happy Canyon, which is not very far from the Santa Rita Hills, is also famous for the Cabernet. So, and then you have everything in between, like the Rhone varieties like Syrah and Grenache, etc. So you really grow almost anything you want in the Central Coast, and there's many different sub-regions over there to choose from, which is actually great for us because we love to work with anything and everything that interests us. We're not like trying to be a Burgundian producer or Bordeaux style producer or even a Rhone producer. I mean, initially we were definitely, more focused on Rhone varieties because it just seemed the kosher market, there wasn't a whole lot of focus over there. And I think that's still the bulk of what, I don't know if it's the bulk, but it's definitely a very big percentage of what we do. And what we're interested in, but we're interested in anything and everything.
Interesting. Are there, speaking of other kosher producers, are there many other kosher producers active in the Central Coast?
No.
Really?
No, there are. I mean, so Herzog wine cellars, they don't really get a whole lot of fruit from the Central Coast. They're getting fruit from all over California. They're definitely not really focused on the Central Coast. There's Timbre, which is Joshua Clapper, and he added his wine. He's also making wine for Narrow Bridge, and maybe there's a couple of other small brands, but they're not exclusively kosher producers. Timbre's, he's got a pretty big production, and his wines are generally not certified kosher. So I think we're really the only ones. The only other one that's technically Central Coast is that I can think off the top of my head is Four Gates in Santa Cruz Mountains.
Okay. Okay. I haven't heard of them, but you're wine people.
He's very small, and amongst like the kosher wine aficionados, he's kind of a legend. His wines are amazing. But he's a very small production. I mean, we're small, but he's like a fraction of our size.
Oh, wow. So speaking of sizes, it's been 13 years. It sounds like you started really small. How has the trajectory of growth been throughout the dozen plus years that you've been active as Shirah?
So the first year that we in 2009, we did one wine, Power to the People, and we did it was a total of 300 cases. And then over the next 2-3 years, we pretty much doubled every year. So the next year we did close to 600 cases. And the year after that we went up to 1,000 cases or something like that. And then we kind of stayed around between 1,500 and 2,000 cases until 2013. And 2013, we grew again. And we stayed at basically around 30 tons all the way until 2019. And 2019 and then there was some vintages that were tougher, both financially and also the growing. I remember 2015 was a very small vintage. We really had a very hard time finding stuff. So there were some, it did gain and drop off a little bit in some vintages, but we really stayed kind of around, 25, 30 ton mark all the way through 2019. In 2019 and 2020, we did very sizable harvests. 2019, I think, was probably somewhere around 60 tons. We made wine for other wineries also, so our total production was much higher, but the stuff that we labeled under our label was probably somewhere around 50 to 60 tons. And then probably just a little less in 2020. And then we moved, last year we moved from Santa Maria. We moved our winery down to Oxnard. So the move was, we moved into like a smaller facility, and also just all those adjustments that we're making along the way, being in a new spot. So 2021 was small, just around 30 tons, and we're just finishing up with 2022, which is also small, around 25 tons. So, but the intent is we're just trying to figure out how much we could fit in this, how much we can max out in here. Once we figure that out, we'll start growing the gamut. We anticipate back up to 50 tons and, see how close we could get to 100 over the next few years.
That's great. What motivated the move?
The winery that we were in Santa Maria, it was a very large winery, and they had their own production, and then they had a whole other building that they rented out for many, many years. They rented out to other wineries. Actually, at some point before Herzog moved to Oxnard, they were in that facility renting space.
Oh, neat.
So a lot of wineries have been through there. But over the last few years, they got a new winemaking team. They kind of changed their business model, and they started vacating all of their clients, and they're really just increasing their production, taking over that facility. So we had a deadline when we had to leave. So that was the main reason for us moving. And then we've been from 2013. We've had a long journey as far as production facilities are concerned.
Okay.
But from 2013 all the way up until 2020, we were producing up there in Santa Maria and living in Los Angeles, which is a 3-hour gap. Yeah. So that's started to prove to be a big strain on
families.
On everything, both on the family and on the business and on production. It's hard to produce wine from that far. It's hard to manage a family from that distance as well. So it just that was, those were the two big reasons why we moved. And so now we're down here in Oxnard, much closer. And but we have, it's we're not renting space, but at that old winery we had space that we rented, but we also had unlimited space to roll over to. If we needed more space, we could just go there and say we need more space. So yeah. And then there was tons of working space and there was a lot more resources over there. So over here, having our own facility is great, but it is limited. So we're just trying to figure out how to produce over here.
I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. I want to break in, and if you also like California alcohol production, I want to give you a sneak peek into the next episode of the Jewish Drinking Show.
Gabe and Shimon Weiss
of Shirah
of Shirah donated their barrels to us. They donated delicious wine to us as well.
Wine award winning.
I mean, their wine is amazing.
I hope you enjoy that sneak peek with Levy and Harmony of the Long Beach Beer Lab. That episode is not going to be next week. We're going to take a 4-week winter break, but that will be airing mid-January. All right, now back into the show. Speaking of facilities, you mentioned earlier you produce for other people, some private labels. How does that situation or setup work? They just pay you and you say, okay, we're labeling it for you.
Yeah. So so every single client has its own arrangement. We don't have any one set system. Right now we don't. Right now, being that we have such a limited space, we're not doing anything for anybody else. We've kind of phased that out, but we are still partnered. In 2013, we started producing Twin Suns in partnership with our distributor, and that has grown, and we're still doing it, but it's not here in this facility. We outsource it to another large winery.
Oh, neat. Oh, neat. How has that been? How has that partnership been with, I mean, what's in it for you? Is it better distribution? Is it wider distribution? Like obviously they get out of it because they can, we have the Shirah makers, like what do you guys get out of it?
We're trying to get market share in every space. And the way to break it down simply is there's low price entry level wine, and then there's mid-level wine, and then there's high-end wine. So we're pretty much with Shirah, our brand, we're pretty firmly in the high end, maybe a little bit in the mid-level, but not much. And so it's a way for us to be able to produce and get some market share in the lower entry level wine area. Just like Shirah, we've been around for 10, 12 years. I lost count.
Over 13 years.
Yeah, over 13 years. And it's a journey. So the whole Twin Suns thing is a journey, and God willing, there's a lot of things to work out. Just with any company that's growing, and God willing, we'll get there.
I figure there's got to be a mutually beneficial aspect, not singularly one way or the other. So it's.
Yeah, well, we are partners on the brand. We are part owners, so its success is our success.
Yeah,
and there's just there's a lot of things to figure out along the way. It's a wine that relies very much on strong partnerships. Those take time to establish, and personnel, good reliable personnel. Those also take a long time to establish. So. And then just the brand and the wines themselves, just refining all those things. So we do feel like there's some way to go before we feel very happy with it. But yeah, we'll get there.
Cool. I'm going to go super duper back. You mentioned talking about even just the Brogia, Power to the People, some of those OG labels that you created over a dozen years ago. We talked about the growth of the company and physical location switching. How do you plan on having new labels, other labels? Just like from a creative standpoint, how has it all been for you guys? Maybe changes, whatever it is.
So we set up. We were very creative early on. We did a lot of very cool creative things. Yeah. And with every creation comes a very sizable amount of work. So we put in a lot of that work early on, and now we're more focused on just establishing those things. Both from a production standpoint and from a market standpoint. So that's what we're focused on now. There's always, our creative side comes first, always, almost to a fault. Okay. There's always opportunities that come up, and we're always open to doing them, and we still do a lot of stuff. A lot of other stuff outside of the stuff that's been established. That's the type of thing that we've realized. The more the established things are, easier it becomes to do those extra credit creative things. When you have a good foundation to build on. So we're working on the foundation now, and we'll definitely come with some cool stuff down the road.
Hey there, I wanted to see how you're enjoying the episode so far. If you have any feedback, comments, questions, anything, please let me know. And also, if you have topics as well as potential guests, including, who knows, maybe yourself, please let me know. Feel free to reach out to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. Thank you, and now back into the show. How has, of course, you guys are a kosher-certified winery. How has that process been with kashrut, with supervisors? How's that been for you guys?
Fine.
It's fine. Great. I asked the question.
No, we have a really good partnership with the OU and our Rabbi Nathanson.
Mm-hmm.
They're great. They've worked with us from day one. They've understood that we are small and growing, and they've been with us the whole way through. Mm-hmm. Now we also work with MKL, which is Rabbi Padua from the UK, and he's also really, really gracious. They're thorough, but they're gracious, understanding. They understand that we're a growing company, and we sometimes just don't have the resources to make everything, exactly the way they want it. Mm-hmm. And yeah, everyone's been really good with us.
Has it been easier working with kosher supervision since your move down? It's probably, especially since the proximity is a lot closer to LA versus being up mid coast.
No, it's become more difficult because they come visit us more often.
Now we're in the ring of fire. But it's certainly been easier for us. We used to have to put seals on every single bin and every single barrel and tape everything up, and so we don't have to do any of that anymore.
There you go. That's one thing off your plate.
Yeah.
That's one thing.
It's a very big thing. We completely forgot about it.
Yeah,
it's only been 2 years.
Totally, until you mentioned it, I was like, oh yeah, we used to have to seal every barrel.
We were recently driving up the Central Coast, like we had to go to a vineyard or something, and like there's always that zone where you're like driving like along the coast, but you've been driving on the coast for a while, and you just start to get into like this zone. And I was like, remember we used to do this every week?
Wow.
And we completely forgot what it's like to do that drive.
It's brutal. It's a brutal drive.
Brutal.
I mean, you do it enough times, schlepping through traffic and Carpinteria, and it's just like.
Yeah, recently we were up at Monterey Wine Company. That's the winery that we
Twin Sons.
That we produced Twin Sons, and we were sealing a bunch of barrels. And I was like, remember we had to do this for hundreds of barrels?
Wow. There you go. That's freeing. That's a nice change.
There you go. Slowly.
It doesn't sound like a lot of work, to put a zip tie through a barrel, over a barrel, but
yeah, it's
a lot of work. It took a lot of time.
Yeah, it only took us 12 years to be able to.
Yeah, for sure. So, actually, one thing I haven't asked about is I remember back maybe 2009, 10, 11. Jewish Week, New York Jewish Week gave you a top award winning wine. I'm sure you've won. Do you mind sharing? Hopefully you're not too humble. Do you mind sharing some of the awards you guys have won over the years?
That was the first one, and I think that was the last one.
We've done a few Jewish weeks, but it's kind of like getting an award for the Jewish Week. It's like when my son plays a video game and he finished, he got to the end, and he's like, all right, done. It's like that
was back when they still printed. That was still back when the New York Jewish Week was in print.
No, we did. There was 2 years in a row that I think it was 2 years in a row where we got first place. The first year was Power to the People, and the second year was Brodu. The first version of each one of those wines. And I'd like to think that those wines are still first place every year. But yeah, it's well, first of all, that's when I think that was when the Jewish Week first beginning with those reviews.
They were like were they special inserts?
Yeah, it was a special insert.
Yeah.
So it was when they first had started with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then also since then they have grown a lot. Mm-hmm. And since then the kosher wine market has gone exploded. So there's just so much more out there. Mm-hmm. The playing field is very much leveled. There's many great wines out there. So, we don't send them wines every year. Also, I don't
Yeah, there were years there.
But did those first 2 years getting the top awards really bring you prominence and sort of brand awareness out there in the kosher
It's
world?
like Gabe said, we got the award and
Okay.
I don't know, maybe.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Your stuff still sells and you're doing all right.
It wasn't like a viral, one of those viral things that you just see the likes just shooting up to the sky. It was there was not much activity after that. So
fair enough. Hello. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to break in again and see if hopefully you're enjoying it. And in the past, I've asked if anybody has any ideas of what Jewish drinking can do beyond the show, beyond different things we can do. But we have the added benefit, the added bonus that Jewish drinking is now an officially recognized 501c3 organization by the IRS. So that means it is now tax deductible if you want to make donations, and we can see what we can do, what new things we can do. So I'm always open, and you are welcome to email me, to reach out to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. Hopefully reach out to me, and I'm always open to questions, ideas, suggestions, anything you might have. So please feel free to reach out to me, and thank you. And now back into the show. Any other random responses, feedback that people have over the years given you about your wines? Anything? I just figured I'd ask. I don't know.
The thing that most customers, I'm the one who's been interacting with customers. I was doing sales for them for a long time. We just hired a salesperson, so
wow.
I very happily handed that off recently.
Yeah.
But I've been doing it for years and years, and I think the thing that I've heard most often from our customers is the thing that they love about our wines is that there's none of our wines that they don't like. There might be some that they feel are better value than others. You could get some for a little less that are as good as something that might be a little more. So that would be the only thing that the only critique that they would give. And then the other thing they say is that whenever they have people over, everyone enjoys the wines. There's no they love all the wines. Everyone they know loves all the wines. And that's been the biggest feedback that I've gotten over the years. Aside from the specific wines that, every season there's one wine that just kind of catches fire and everyone starts going crazy about it. Just the right wine at the right time. But aside from that, the general feedback was, people just enjoy the style, enjoy the approachability, and the universal, the fact that they're just universally liked by everyone, whether it's somebody who's an experienced wine drinker or less experienced wine drinker.
That's great. That's really wonderful. Making wine, it's fine. It's great. It's delicious. What do you guys do with your barrels after you're done with production of wine? Do you toss them? Do you reuse them? Do you sell them to breweries? Anything?
We're constantly using our barrels, always reusing them. We have barrels that are very old from our first vintages. A neutral barrel is great. Some people insist on only using neutral barrels. The older, the better.
Really?
As long as they don't go bad, and if you're making wine, you're doing good winemaking, your barrels are not going to go bad almost ever. Every once in a while, sometimes you'll have some spoilage, microbes, or a barrel lost its sulfur, but if you're on top of it, and 90% of the time you're on top of it, the barrels are great. But we do sometimes have a surplus, or sometimes somebody needs barrels. Whatever, sure, you want some barrels, we'll give you some barrels. So we're not looking to get rid of barrels. Sometimes we need to make space. If we're buying some new oak, and we just need to make some space, or if we feel, I don't know, we had puncheons. Puncheons are these large 500-liter barrels, so double the size of a regular barrel. They need their own racks. They take up a lot of space. They have certain advantages, but for us in this facility, we're you know what, the puncheons is just extra credit that theoretically maybe is doing something, but probably not really anything significant for the quality of the wine. So
what's the advantage? What's the advantage of reusing the wine barrels? Is it just a consistency of flavor?
Well, there is certain
and saving money and not buying new ones, of course.
Well, yeah. Well, we've noticed this from other producers that they have a certain house flavor, and I wouldn't even say style, because it's just the barrels are constantly used over and over, and it's just a certain infusion of that cellar's flavors that are just there constantly. But the older the barrel, the more neutral, like the less oakiness there's going to get. It's just simply a vessel.
Wow.
And oak flavors are always something that, producers are trying to make sure they have in balance, and where you're not going overboard. You don't want too much oaky flavors. You want the flavors of the wine to really show. So a little bit of toast characteristic, a little bit of, the woodiness of the barrels. It definitely adds something really nice. The tannins really help the wine. Sometimes it's actually really cool. If you have the same wine in a neutral barrel and a new oak barrel, a lot of times you could see like the freshness of color, like the bright, vivid purple in the new oak barrel versus the old barrel, just because the tannins will keep the wine much fresher.
Oh, wow.
So you could see it. But you need to keep oak in check. So neutral barrels is kind of like the mainstay. That's really what you want to sell.
So now that you're singing the praises of old barrels, why would you get rid of them? You mentioned earlier getting the sulfur being out of whack. What reasons would prompt you to just, I don't know, discard a barrel?
If the barrel goes bad, then and that happens a lot. There's a whole industry out there like oak barrel planters, and it's just they're at that point, it's just sell them off to be sold as a planter, and not to a winery or a brewery or any other company that needs a barrel for a beverage.
You give barrels to a brewery, right?
We've given Levy Long Beach Beer Lab. We've given him a bunch of barrels. A lot of brewing is great in barrels. A lot of it is not, depending on the style. Depending on the style of beer that you're making. It's actually been quite a while since we've given Levy barrels. I think like he's doing a lot of really good IPAs and stuff now, and oak and IPAs is not something that
So this is a teaser for the Long Beach Beer Lab episode. But what he shared with me is that they primarily use them for sours. But people's interest in sours are not as high as we might expect. So that's probably why he hasn't asked for any.
Yeah, I think we gave him a bunch of barrels early on when they first started, and they were doing a lot of sours, and now I think he's probably just reusing them.
Guys, this has been great. This has been wonderful. But before we go, is there anything you guys would like to promote?
We are always trying to promote our wine club.
Ooh, okay.
Well, that's our main avenue of sale is just through our wine club.
Oh, really?
It's just a way for people who want to stay up to date on all the wines we're releasing. We do 3 releases a year. We bottle about 12 to 15 different wines every year with every vintage, and we store them and then we release them 3 times a year. We will choose 4 to 6 new wines to release 3 times a year. And that's a way for people who want to have our wines and drink our wines. It's a way for people to stay up to date. It's nice. It's nicely discounted. There's some nice benefits in there. And that's the best way to buy our wine.
Very neat. Very neat. Awesome. All right, guys, this has been wonderful. This has been fascinating to hear and chat. And then finally, L'chaim.
L'chaim.